Picture this scene. Nearly 300 soldiers trapped in a dust-filled valley, enemy fighters covering every hillside with gunfire, each passing moment bringing them closer to catastrophe. The commanders held back, afraid to authorize strikes so close to their own troops. The men trapped below prepared for the end, until a calm, determined voice came through their radios. It belonged to Captain Erin Callahan, the pilot everyone had written off as nothing more than a paper pusher. In those critical minutes, she disobeyed every command, flew straight into impossible danger, and rewrote history. But before we continue, drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. I always enjoy connecting with our military community around the globe. Captain Erin Callahan had just turned 29, though she carried herself with a quietness that made others underestimate her constantly. She barely cleared 5.5 feet, with a lean frame and brown hair always pulled back under her uniform cap. Nothing about her appearance commanded attention. Standing in the hangar surrounded by confident fighter pilots and cocky crews, she blended into the background, and that's precisely how most people treated her, like she wasn't really there. They gave her a label that stuck like glue, the paper pilot. People said it with smirks and casual shrugs. She reviewed maintenance paperwork, put together weather reports, and handled administrative tasks in the operations room. When she occasionally climbed into her cherished A-10 Thunderbolt, it was usually just for routine training flights, never for anything significant. The important missions went to others, men with commanding voices, unshakable confidence, and reputations built on stories shared over drinks in the officers' club. Erin, on the other hand, typically left early from social gatherings. She preferred eating her meals in peace, often by herself. She wasn't unfriendly or distant, but she maintained a reserved demeanor that separated her from the pack. Some interpreted this as timidity, others saw it as delicate. Nobody recognized the steel underneath. Every military installation has its unspoken hierarchy, even if people pretend it doesn't exist. The fast jet crews flying F-16s and F-15s occupied the top tier. They were the elite warriors of the sky, flying sleek machines with matching attitudes. When they entered a space, conversations paused. Ground crews looked up to them. Infantry troops admired them. Beneath them came the transport operators, C-30 pilots, and helicopter crews, the essential backbone of moving supplies and personnel. They lacked glamour, but they earned genuine respect for keeping operations running. Then came pilots like Erin, placed at the bottom not because of ability, but because of perception. She wore the same wings as everyone else, but to many she was simply another officer stuck behind a desk, a pilot only on paper. The disrespect was subtler than direct insult. It thrived on small moments of dismissal, quiet laughter when she spoke during briefings, a mechanic rolling his eyes as she walked past, another pilot muttering under his breath, "Save your energy, Callahan. Stick to your spreadsheets." Yet Erin absorbed it all without complaint. What nobody understood was the personal history carved into her soul long before she arrived in Afghanistan. Erin came from a family where military service wasn't a choice. It was woven into who they were. Her father, Patrick Callahan, had endured a harsh tour in Vietnam. He never romanticized it. He talked about confusion, about terrifying nights under attack, about friends who never returned home. His message to his kids was straightforward: honor the uniform because others paid the ultimate price for it. Erin's older brother, Daniel, carried that message into action. He joined the Marines and deployed to Iraq while she was still finishing high school. Erin could still see that day clearly, Daniel waving from the transport vehicle, his smile wide, her heart torn between pride and dread. He never made it back. A roadside explosion took his life and left a wound in her that would never fully heal. Daniel's death created something permanent inside Erin. She didn't broadcast, she didn't make her grief visible, but every time someone laughed at her or treated her as incompetent, she remembered her brother's sacrifice. Quietly, persistently, she committed herself to earning the same respect. Erin's answer to mockery wasn't confrontation, it was relentless preparation. Long after everyone else had gone to sleep, she stayed awake in her quarters with a small flashlight, studying terrain maps of valleys and mountains until she could draw them without looking. She worked through weapons systems manuals, page by page, absorbing firing calculations until the numbers lived in her memory. She practiced emergency procedures in darkness, her hands moving through the sequences until they became second nature. She even taught herself basic Pashto phrases, not for appearances, but so she could understand bits of enemy radio communications without waiting for translation. Every detail held importance for her. Every piece of information was another tool to be prepared. While others dismissed her as the paper pilot, Erin was quietly forging herself into a weapon nobody expected. Intelligence updates came in steadily over the following weeks. Intercepted communications, suspicious supply movements happening at night, changes in local insurgent behavior. Most officers gave them a quick glance. Erin examined them thoroughly. A clear pattern began forming in her mind. Not vague hunches, but definite conclusions. Enemy forces were preparing something major. They weren't just testing defenses. They were gathering strength. And she could pinpoint exactly where they planned to attack. It was a valley she had studied repeatedly on her maps, a natural death trap encircled by steep hills. If friendly forces moved in there without adequate air support, they would be caught with enemies on every side. Getting reinforcements in would be nearly impossible. One evening, bent over a table covered with reports, she whispered to herself, "It's a killing ground." Another officer walking by overheard and laughed. "You overthink everything, Callahan. Let the actual combat pilots worry about the fighting." He continued past, leaving her staring at the documents, her chest tight with worry. During the next briefing, Erin voiced her concerns. She spoke carefully, explaining how an ambush could unfold if ground forces were sent into that valley. She recommended preparing backup strike plans in case insurgents trapped them. The colonel didn't even glance up from his coffee. Noted, Callahan. Focus on your assigned tasks. We've handled this kind of operation countless times. Quiet laughter spread through the room. One pilot said just loudly enough for others to hear, "The paper pilot strikes again." Erin sat back down, her face flushed but her gaze remained steady. She didn't argue back. She didn't push further. She simply clenched her jaw tight and wrote one sentence in her notebook that night: "Be ready regardless." Her worst fears came true. Days later, the orders came through. A combined force of nearly 300 soldiers, 2 infantry companies, with support units, would advance into the exact valley she had warned about. The mission briefing described it as standard procedure. Erin felt her stomach drop. She knew the valley's layout intimately. If the insurgents had fortified positions, as she suspected, those 288 soldiers would be surrounded within minutes. Without precise, extremely close air support, they wouldn't stand a chance. She stayed silent. Her warnings had been dismissed before, but deep down, she knew disaster was approaching. That night, she went back to the simulator facility. Alone, she ran through the same scenario she had secretly practiced for months: a trapped ground force, enemy positions in the hills, hidden anti-aircraft missiles tucked into the landscape. She practiced delivering bursts of 30mm cannon fire within 50 meters of friendly troops, hitting only hostile targets. 40 runs, 50, 60. She drilled until her hands cramped and her vision blurred. Nobody watched. Nobody knew. 2 days before the operation, she walked past a group of officers in the dining facility. They were joking about the upcoming mission, treating it like routine business. One shrugged and said with a cynical grin, "If things fall apart, we'll just file the casualty report." The table burst into laughter. Erin stopped just out of view, her jaw clenched so hard it ached. She turned away without speaking. In her thoughts, she repeated the promise she had written in her notebook: "Be ready regardless." Captain Erin Callahan sat in the dimly lit briefing room, her organized notes laid out before her. The projector displayed grainy satellite photos of ridgelines and dirt roads, terrain she knew better than anyone present. She cleared her throat gently, waiting for the right moment to speak. The colonel paced at the front, his voice sharp and confident as he outlined the week's troop movements. Erin raised her hand. "Sir," she started, keeping her tone respectful but firm, "based on recent intelligence and movement patterns, I'd suggest a precautionary surveillance flight. Just one A-10 pass over that valley tomorrow could verify." If the colonel interrupted her with a harsh laugh, the kind designed to humiliate. "We don't burn fuel on anxious flyers, Callahan. Stay in your lane and let the real missions proceed." Ripples of amusement moved through the room. One lieutenant leaned back, muttering just loud enough, "Maybe she can surveil the supply closet instead." More laughter followed. Erin's face burned, but she maintained her composure. She lowered her hand, keeping her eyes on the map. She knew what she saw. She knew the valley was dangerous. But once again, nobody listened. The sting lingered into the next afternoon, when she found herself near the shooting range, standing close to a group of infantry soldiers, running live fire training. She carried her flight helmet under her arm, on her way to check on her aircraft. The sergeant supervising the exercise noticed her and smirked. "Easy there, ma'am. Don't overdo it. Leave the combat to the men." The comment wasn't particularly witty, but the laughter it triggered was sharp and cutting. Soldiers grinned, weapons slung across their bodies, as if she were a punchline dropped into their afternoon. Erin forced a polite nod and walked past them. She didn't react. She never did, but her grip on the helmet tightened until her knuckles went white. Later that week, in the hangar, mechanics were servicing her aircraft, inspecting systems, and loading ammunition for the massive cannon. Erin approached with her clipboard, ready to review the maintenance checklist. One of the younger mechanics looked up and shook his head with a grin. "Why bother tuning her jet? She'll never actually fly it." Another laughed. "Yeah, keep it spotless for the next pilot who'll actually use it." They assumed she didn't hear. She did, she always did. Erin signed off on the paperwork without responding, thanked them, and walked away. Once she was certain nobody was watching, she pressed her palm against the titanium exterior of the A-10. The cool metal steadied her, anchored her. Under her breath, barely audible, she said, "They don't understand what you can do." She repeated this ritual every time she passed the aircraft, as if the words were both a commitment and a prayer. The intelligence reports continued accumulating. Erin sorted through them late into the night, marking details nobody else bothered to piece together. More weapons heading south, more intercepted communications about logistics, patterns too organized to be random. She assembled the picture fragment by fragment until it became undeniable. A military buildup was underway. An ambush was imminent. She mentioned it again in casual conversation, this time with a major she considered trustworthy. He dismissed her, distracted by his phone. "Intelligence always exaggerates, Callahan. Don't stress about it." Others were less kind. In the dining hall, soldiers joked openly. "If we get ambushed out there, Callahan can fax headquarters for help." The table erupted in laughter. Someone pantomimed typing on an imaginary keyboard, head bobbing, as though bored at a desk. Erin sat several tables away, quiet, her spoon stirring her food absently. She didn't react, but every word cut deep. Her sense of isolation grew heavier with each passing day. Younger pilots, some barely finished with training, were being assigned to actual combat missions. She watched them stride confidently across the airfield, helmets tucked under arms, grinning as they climbed into cockpits. She had accumulated more flight hours, knew the technical manuals completely, could execute precision maneuvers in the simulator flawlessly, yet she remained sidelined. The frustration gnawed at her, sharper each time another name was called, instead of hers. At night she walked through the empty hangar, her footsteps echoing against the concrete. She stopped beside her A-10, ran her fingers along the rivets, and whispered again, "They don't understand what you can do." It wasn't merely habit, it was how she survived. Those words reminded her, she was more than the mockery, more than the dismissal. She would be ready when her moment arrived. But the mockery didn't disappear, it transformed. The laughter that once echoed openly in rooms began shifting into whispers. She'd walk past clusters of soldiers and hear her name dropped low, followed by hushed chuckles. Some began questioning openly whether she could handle actual combat. "I wouldn't want her covering my squad," one muttered near the vehicle depot. She'd panic. Whispers evolved into uneasy glances when she entered spaces. People laughed less directly at her, but the skepticism hung heavier in the atmosphere. It was almost worse, suspicion replacing open ridicule. She endured it, maintaining her calm exterior, but inside the storm was gathering strength. The breaking point arrived one morning in the operations center. Assignments were being distributed for a major mission, nearly 300 soldiers moving into the valley. Erin had studied repeatedly. She understood the terrain better than anyone. She understood the dangers better than anyone. When the colonel listed the air support assignments, her name was absent. "Sir," she said carefully, keeping her voice level, "I know that valley thoroughly. I've analyzed it extensively. If enemy forces have fortified those ridges, they'll be completely exposed. I can provide effective." He raised his hand, cutting her off. "You're not on the roster, Callahan." End of discussion. Her mouth went dry. She wanted to argue, to insist they listen, but the colonel's stare eliminated any possibility of being heard. Around the table, officers shifted uncomfortably. Nobody spoke up. Nobody defended her. The briefing continued as if she hadn't spoken at all. Erin sat frozen in her seat, her notes clutched tightly in her hands. Her mind screamed with certainty about what was coming, but her lips remained sealed. She had been ignored too many times before. Later that day, she overheard the same officers joking outside the operations center. One shrugged, lighting a cigarette. "If things go wrong out there, we'll just file the casualty report." Another laughed. "Yeah, good thing Callahan's around. She can draft it quickly." The laughter stung sharper than before, because this time real lives hung in the balance. This wasn't about her pride or her standing in the hangar's social hierarchy. This was about lives, 2098 of them. Soldiers were walking straight into the trap she had predicted, and Command couldn't see it. Erin clenched her jaw until it hurt, turned away, and walked back toward the hangar. Her A-10 sat there, silent and waiting, sunlight gleaming off its battle-worn exterior. She rested her hand against it again, eyes closed tight. "They don't understand what you can do," she whispered once more. But she did, and soon everyone else would too. The valley exploded into chaos. Dust clouds rose like suffocating smoke as enemy fire hammered down from the ridgelines. 2098 American soldiers were trapped in the basin below, their weapons firing against impossible odds. Mortar rounds fell from above. Ammunition was running dangerously low. Panic edged into every radio transmission. Three sides hot were completely boxed in. A frantic voice shouted over communications. Another broke through, breathless. "We've got casualties piling up. We can't maintain this position much longer." In the operations center, officers stood paralyzed around glowing displays. The colonel demanded updates, but nobody had viable solutions. Icons representing friendly forces blinked on the screen, encircled by swarming red markers. Reinforcements were too distant. The ridgelines made conventional airstrikes impossible without endangering the trapped soldiers below. "We can't authorize air support within 100 meters of friendlies," one major insisted, his voice strained. "It's too close, too risky." The colonel swore and slammed his fist onto the table. "So what's our option? Watch them die." Silence filled the room. Nobody offered alternatives. Nobody wanted responsibility for failure. Yet everyone could see the brutal truth displayed in red across the screen. Those soldiers were running out of time. On the opposite side of the base, far from the chaos of the operations center, Erin Callahan sat at her small desk. The intelligence reports she had warned them about had all materialized. She could visualize the valley perfectly in her mind, every ridge, every terrain fold, every danger she had marked on her maps. Her chest felt compressed, as if something was crushing it from within. She pulled a notepad from her drawer and scribbled one sentence. "If you're reading this, I acted because 2098 lives mattered more than orders." She tore the page free, folded it, and slid it into her locker. Then she stood, steady and calm, and walked toward the hangar. Her A-10 waited, fueled and armed from its previous maintenance check. Mechanics had completed their work hours earlier, assuming it would sit unused once again. Erin moved with purpose, every action deliberate. Flight suit on, helmet in hand, pre-flight checks run from memory. Oil levels, hydraulics, fuel pressure, weapons systems. Her hands flowed like water over stone, smooth, practiced, unstoppable. Climbing into the cockpit, she secured her harness and pulled the canopy down. For a brief moment, her reflection caught in the glass. She saw herself not as the base perceived her, a paper pilot, but as she truly was, ready, capable, unafraid. Her left hand gripped the throttle, and her flight suit sleeve rode up slightly. The tattoo inked on her wrist, her brother Daniel's Marine unit emblem, caught the cockpit lighting. She pressed her thumb over it once, silently. Then she advanced the throttle forward. The twin engines roared to life, shaking the earth beneath. A few ground crew members turned, startled, rushing toward the aircraft. By the time they realized what was happening, she was already rolling. Control tower voices crackled with alarm. "Callahan, abort takeoff. You are not cleared for departure. Repeat, abort immediately." Erin didn't respond. She pushed harder, the A-10 thundering down the runway. Moments later, wheels lifted from concrete, and the aircraft clawed into the sky. Above the valley, soldiers crouched low, their rifles spitting short bursts to conserve precious rounds. The air was thick with dust, gunfire, and desperate shouts. They had all accepted they would die in that basin. Then a new sound cut through the chaos, the unmistakable growl of an A-10 overhead. Heads snapped skyward. One soldier muttered in disbelief. "Is that The radio crackled alive in the trapped commander's ear. A calm, unwavering voice cut through the noise. Ground unit, this is Thunderbolt, inbound. Mark your position with infrared. I see you. The commander grabbed his microphone, his voice cracking with emotion. Whoever you are, keep firing. You just gave us breathing room. Erin angled in. The valley unfolded beneath her, exactly as she had envisioned it. Ridgelines swarming with muzzle flashes. Heavy weapons emplacements, tearing into the earth, where the Americans were pinned. She aligned her first attack run, crosshairs locked steady. Her finger squeezed the trigger, unleashing the massive cannon's roar. 30mm shells tore across a fortified position, eliminating it in a shower of debris and sudden silence. Soldiers below watched, stunned. The gun that had been hammering them moments before went quiet. A ragged cheer rose from their ranks. Erin banked hard, climbing back through the dust cloud. Her pulse was steady, her breathing even. She was doing what she had trained for in solitude, what she had whispered to her aircraft every night, showing them what she could do. Another devastating burst. Enemy fighters scattered, their coordinated fire broken. In the chaos, a soldier glanced skyward and whispered, "Valkyrie." The name spread through communications like wildfire. Years ago, during training operations, Erin had earned that call sign for her precision and composure under pressure. It had been forgotten, buried under months of mockery. But the veterans remembered now. It's her, someone breathed. Valkyrie's up there. Back at headquarters, senior command patched into the network. A general's voice came through, sharp and incredulous. Who is operating that aircraft? Report immediately. Silence answered, broken only by the roar of Erin's cannon on another run. She's saving nearly 300 men, one operator muttered in the operations center. The colonel's face went pale as understanding dawned. The dismissed paper pilot was the one holding the line. Callahan, stand down, immediately. The general barked over communications. You are not authorized. Return to base at once. Erin switched off the command frequency, leaving only the ground unit in her ear. Orders didn't matter now. Lives did. She dropped low again, this time threading a burst within 50 meters of friendly positions. A maneuver every manual labeled suicide. The rounds landed with surgical precision, cutting down an enemy assault team advancing, dangerously close. Dust and silence followed. Then the trapped commander's voice came through, steadier this time. Thunderbolt, direct hits, keep it coming. Every second, balanced on a knife's edge. Fuel, ammunition, and time were all finite. One error could mean catastrophe. Yet Erin moved as if guided by instinct, honed over countless unseen hours. Her brother's emblem burned against her wrist as her hand gripped the throttle tighter. She could almost hear his voice. Don't quit, Erin, not now. Enemy forces attempted another assault, rushing down from the ridgeline. Erin rolled into them, unleashing another precise line of fire that halted the charge completely. Each run became closer, tighter, more perilous. Sweat trickled down her back, but her voice on the radio never faltered. Ground unit, move left. I'll clear the ridge. Her bursts opened corridors of survival, each one creating seconds that stretched into lifelines. In the operations center, disbelief transformed into hushed awe. The same officers who had once laughed now watched the radar display, unable to deny what they witnessed. One pilot alone, defying orders, saving hundreds. The general came back on communications, his voice less commanding, more human. Whoever you are, Godspeed, finish it. Erin didn't respond. She didn't need to. She lined up again. The battlefield was her canvas, precision, her instrument. Every dive, every trigger squeeze, was a gamble with death. But to the soldiers below, she was no longer the quiet pilot mocked in hangars. She was Valkyrie, guardian of the condemned, rewriting the outcome of history with each thundering pass. By the time the sun descended lower, the valley had transformed. Where there had been chaos, there was now order. Where there had been despair, there was now hope. Soldiers advanced again, no longer caged, but moving forward, protected by the relentless shadow overhead. The woman they had once dismissed as fragile was flying like nobody else could, and 2098 lives now depended on her refusing to stop. The first helicopter emerged through the haze, rotors slicing the smoke-filled air as it descended toward the battered valley floor. Dust exploded outward in a violent circle, engulfing soldiers as they rushed forward. Arms reached up, dragging wounded aboard. shoving ammunition crates aside to make space for bleeding men. The trapped commander's voice crackled through radio waves, no longer frantic but steady. Transport 1 is loading. Keep them covered. Above, Erin's A-10 circled gracefully. She scanned the ridgelines, eyes sharp, fingers poised over the trigger. Any muzzle flash, any suspicious movement, and she would eliminate it before it threatened the evacuation. For the first time that day, she heard something new in the soldiers' transmissions. Ho! Choppers away, the commander called. Cheers rose faintly, even through the roar of rotors. Another helicopter swooped in, settling into the dust cloud. Erin dove low, unleashing a precise burst that silenced a weapons crew daring to take aim. The soldiers below saw. They knew someone overhead had decided their lives were worth the risk. One by one, the helicopters lifted, each carrying soldiers who hours earlier had resigned themselves to dying in that valley. Not a single one was left behind. Not a single life was lost. When the final helicopter rose, struggling under its heavy load, Erin pulled her A-10 higher into the sky. She circled above until the valley was empty of Americans and filled only with silence. Then she banked toward home. Back at the base, news spread faster than official channels could control it. Mechanics, medics, clerks, infantry, everyone knew something extraordinary had occurred. They crowded near the flight line, eyes searching the horizon. When Erin's aircraft appeared, dust-covered but steady in flight, murmurs rippled through the crowd. She landed smoothly, wheels touching the runway. As the aircraft taxied in, the tower's voice broke over communications, trembling despite attempting formality. Thunderbolt, welcome back. Engines wound down. The canopy hissed open. Erin climbed out slowly, her boots touching the concrete as the weight of what she had accomplished settled on her shoulders. Officers hurried forward, their expressions unreadable. For a heartbeat, nobody knew what would happen next. Would she face arrest for disobeying orders, stripped of her wings? Then movement cut through the tension. A man in dusty combat fatigues, face streaked with sweat and dirt, stepped from the crowd. It was the infantry commander who had led the ground unit, whose soldiers had survived because of her. He walked with purpose, stopping a few feet from her. The flight line went silent. He raised his hand and saluted sharply, his voice carrying across the crowd. 300 souls walk this earth today, because of you. That's the only record that matters. The words hit like thunder. Every mechanic, every medic, every soldier on that flight line snapped into salute. What began as one man's gesture became a wave of respect stretching across the base. For the first time in her career, Erin stood at the center of honor she had never sought, but had always earned. She returned the salute, her posture straight, but her eyes soft. Her voice was calm, almost quiet. I only did my duty, sir. The infantry commander lowered his hand, but his gaze held hers. There was no laughter now, no dismissal, only respect. In the days that followed, official channels buzzed with debates and paperwork. Some demanded punishment for disobedience. Others insisted her actions be written into training doctrine. But paperwork could never erase what everyone on that base had witnessed. A pilot who refused to let nearly 300 Americans die. Stories in the dining hall repeated the account in hushed tones. She flew within 50 meters of our troops, one soldier said. Suicidal distance, but not a single friendly casualty. Another shook his head in disbelief. She changed the entire battle. Senior command eventually acknowledged what the moment had already decided. New training modules were written. Danger close restrictions were re-examined. Erin's improvisation became a case study in survival, not recklessness. Doctrine bent, not because she sought glory, but because she had demonstrated what was possible when lives mattered more than regulations. And Erin, she remained herself. She still ate quietly in the dining hall, still studied maps, late into the night, still touched her A-10's titanium exterior before each flight. She carried no swagger, no new arrogance, only a deeper calm. Weeks later, she walked past the operations center where a new map had been mounted. Red markers dotted valleys across the region, danger zones, and in one corner, someone had drawn a fresh line, in black ink, curving through the valley, that should have been a graveyard, but had become a path home. It was the exact flight path Erin had flown. She stopped, studying. Soldiers passed by, some nodding respectfully, some pausing to touch the map, as though it were sacred ground. Erin smiled faintly, not for herself, but for what it represented, proof that silence could still shape history, that courage could redraw the map. History isn't changed by those who follow rules blindly, but by those who act when lives hang in the balance. Erin Callahan had been mocked, dismissed, left in the shadows, but when the moment arrived, she rose, and because of her, 300 Americans returned home alive. The paper pilot, nobody wanted, had become the warrior everyone needed. One woman, dismissed as too weak, proved that courage is measured not in rank, but in sacrifice. She turned silence into strength, and doubt into history. Her actions remind us that when lives hang in the balance, true character is revealed not by orders, but by the will to act. If this story moved you, salute in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss the next true account of valor. Until next time, stand proud, stay strong, and honor those who serve.